Hello, everyone, and good afternoon here at the U.S. Center. Excited for this event, Advancing Early Warning Systems and Climate Services for All. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Assistant Director for Climate Services at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, Dr. Julian Reyes.
Thanks, Tom. Nice seeing you all again. Before I introduce the panel, I'd like to provide a broad overview and framing for our discussion today. 2 years ago, the administration released a landmark report that laid a vision in which every person, every community, and every business has access to usable, useful, and used climate services that empower communities to prepare for, respond, and be resilient to climate change. In addition to that report, the recently released National Climate Resilience Framework also laid the groundwork for equipping communities with climate information and resources to help them assess their risk and develop climate resilience solutions. We are in a moment with an unprecedented suite of actionable climate services, climate data, tools, information, and technical assistance, and we also have administration support that guides our work towards more useful, usable, and used climate information and services. Yet, the demand for climate information and services far outweighs the supply, both within and outside the federal government, and the pace of climate change and its impacts are accelerating much faster than our ability to develop and deliver climate services to all. While we still have a lot of work to do, we have made progress. I am happy to share new enhancements to the Climate Mapping for Resilience and Adaptation, or CAMRA portal. CAMRA acts as a centralized platform now, helping users understand climate-related hazards now and in the future, as well as identify relevant programs and funding opportunities to help support climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience projects. Now users will find more context for why and how they can use CAMRA. The update includes specific guidance for checking observation-based data, such as FEMA's National Risk Index and NOAA's billion-dollar disasters. The site also helps users move forward in time to recognize how climate-related hazards that occurred in the past might change under conditions projected for the future. Among CAMRA's other improvements, opportunities for federal funding for resilience and adaptation projects are now more obvious, and a new hazard, extreme cold, has been added to the site. Users can also find updates to federal plans, policies, and standards related to climate, including the 2023 update to the Nature-Based Solutions Resource Guide, a compendium of federal examples, guidance, and resources, which we released just yesterday. The site will continue to evolve through 2024, incorporating results from the latest global climate model experiments. Another useful climate service is the newly released Interactive Atlas of the 5th National Climate Assessment. It's an online mapping tool that provides downscaled projections of temperature and precipitation at decision-relevant timescales and spatial scales. In addition to our climate data and tools, we are enhancing coordination in our technical capacity to ensure there is no wrong door to technical assistance and climate services, taking a whole-of-government approach to tackling the climate crisis. We are bringing new partners to the table to strengthen and expand our work. I am also proud to announce that the Department of Housing and Urban Development has officially joined the U.S. Global Change Research Program, enhancing the agency's ability to create strong, sustainable, and inclusive communities that are resilient to climate change and its impacts. HUD marks the 15th federal agency to join this important program, mandated by Congress to coordinate federal research and investment across the U.S. government. New science assessments and services provide a roadmap for other nations to advance understanding and inform decisions, empowering communities to plan and act. I am excited to hear more from our esteemed group of panelists to describe additional climate services and early warning systems that support adaptation and resilience efforts around the world. And with that, I'd like to welcome our panel up to the stage. Okay, and in a different order, we'll start from my far left, your far right. We have Dr. Rick Spinrad, Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Next, we have Ms. Ann Vaughn, USAID Director for Prepare. Next, we have Dr. Benjamin Zaitchik, GeoHealth Past President for the American Geophysical Union, also AGU. And right next to me, we have Dr. Stephanie Morris, Senior Climate Adaptation Coordinator for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Dr. Tatiana Marufo will deliver recorded remarks. She is head of Central Office of the National Observatory of Health and the program lead of Climate, Environment, and the Health Program for Mozambique's National Institute of Health. So we're going to get started, and we'll start with Dr. Spinrad. Given NOAA's leadership role in climate services, can you describe some domestic and international examples of early warning systems for health and water?
Thank you, Julian. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm not sure I'd be characterized as at your far left, but I'm willing to start this discussion. And I really appreciate the opportunity to lead with a perspective on some of the science and climate products and services in the context of early warning systems for health and hydrologic forecasting. The U.S. has been one of the leaders globally and certainly one of the strong partners, I'd like to believe, in developing climate service specifically for health, spearheading a number of activities both at home and globally. At NOAA specifically, we're trying to adopt a One Health concept, which is really the merging, if you will, of considerations for environmental health, public health, as well as the health of animals, because don't forget, part of our responsibility is for things like the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So for us, it's really a One Health issue, which requires, therefore, a cross-sectoral approach. And it means having some understanding of what the best use is of our environmental and climate data and information. But more than that, it means targeting, because we're never going to have enough resources in total, the products and services, data and tools to aid communities. So early warning systems specifically designed to produce forecasts and predictions for things such as heat, air quality, environmental drivers of infectious disease, for example, that affect human health, but also impact the well-being of fisheries are examples of that kind of convergence. And in one case, these systems can help to protect communities against health and seafood risks from elevated coastal water temperatures, for example. So you can easily see how having that environmental information, but also the combination with the health community is critical. Coupling the environmental data with things like molecular techniques, leading-edge techniques in biomedicine, we can develop forecast capabilities for understanding things like the pathogenic Vibrio bacteria that thrive in coastal waters around the world. And our forecasts right now can provide up to a 2-day early warning of the probability of occurrence of Vibrio pathogens, which of course become more prevalent as water temperatures rise. So you can envision using satellite data, using in situ observations, but working closely with the medical community to understand what we need to measure and what are the sort of lead times needed for predictions. And to put it in context, in the U.S. alone, Vibrio bacteria cause an estimated 80,000 illnesses annually. So that's just one example. We're also working at the international level to advance a number of climate services through collaboration between the World Meteorological Organization and the World Health Organization, which has a joint study group on climate services for health. Let me shift gears a little bit and talk about another aspect, and that's heat health. We learned some important lessons at NOAA years ago in developing an integrated drought information system and recognized that a similar sort of approach, and when we say integrated, it really means integrating a number of federal services. So whether it's the EPA or USGS or NOAA or NASA, developing an approach toward integrated heat health information services is critical. So we're developing the first national heat strategic plan, which will embrace that combination of expertise, capabilities, and observational capacities at all the agencies. We're also doing this on a global basis with WMO and the Group on Earth Observations to help launch the Global Heat Resilience Service, which is designed to provide climate services for communities around the world. It's a co-developed capability, and I can't overemphasize that piece too. It's not good enough for us pointy-headed scientists to go in and say we got a great solution. We've got to do this in conjunction with the communities most in need. Let me shift gears again and talk about water, and in this case I'll focus specifically on freshwater systems, and I'd like to use this opportunity to announce that with funds from the PREPARE, the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, we've identified another $2 million, also working with the Group on Earth Observations to develop the Global Water Sustainability Initiative known as GeoGLOS, which will specifically focus on activities in the Nile River Basin to develop a much more improved hydrologic forecast system. It's part of a larger $15 million investment in PREPARE to expand early warning systems throughout Africa. We're also doing some work in the Caribbean and with our colleagues in the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, and the Cayman Islands to invest about $1 million to improve the forecast of storm surge risks, so freshwater to saltwater, those storm surge associated with tropical cyclones. So you can see there's this rich blend of environmental factors that provide information that we can use to feed early warning systems, as long as we're co-developing them with the user communities, which, oh, by the way, includes the medical communities on the ground, and take best advantage of the leading edge capabilities. And I would also say take best advantage of some of the wonderful international collaborations like the Group on Earth Observations to define where our capacities, where our needs, and where can we get the best impact from the combined effort. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Really appreciate that. And I really appreciate your focus on co-production, co-creation, working with communities and really making sure that what we provide to them is really what they need and can use. And I'm really excited about the additional money under Prepare. And I think your comments on WMO, WHO, GEO, we can't do this alone. It's a whole of government, whole of society, and we're working together to maximize the benefit to society. So thanks, Rick. Turning now to Ms. Vaughn, USAID plays a vital role in mitigating climate change and addressing its impacts by partnering with countries to implement ambitious emissions reductions measures, protect critical ecosystems, transition to renewable energy, build resilience against the impacts of climate change, and promote the flow of capital toward climate-positive investments, and I'm sure a lot more. Can you describe efforts at your agency and more broadly the U.S. governments to build resilience to climate impacts in developing countries and the role that climate information is playing in those efforts?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for hosting and pulling us all together. We're doing a lot. You listed some of it, but maybe I'll take a 10,000-foot step back and say why we're doing all of these things. And I think we're at the COP. We know there's climate change and climate crisis is having impacts around the world. To the tune of just last year, we had economic losses totaling $313 billion. We had lives, livelihoods, infrastructure, all damaged or lost, and have a real need to help make sure we're adapting. And that's, the administrator already spoke about Prepare, but also to share a little bit more about the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, which USAID and SPEC lead, but have amazing partnerships with NOAA. We've got USDA colleagues in the audience and others from across the interagency. So we have 19 interagency partners who are working to help 500 million people become, and USDA here, obviously. Sorry, Stephanie. Across the government to help 500 million people become more climate resilient. So it's an ambitious agenda, but one that's needed considering these impacts and the economic problems just raised, but also the return on investment that we see when we invest in adaptation is huge. Global Commission on Adaptation 2.5 years ago came out with some return and the return on investment. What happens when we invest in adaptation? There's results of for every dollar spent, X amount it comes back. When we start talking about early warning systems and climate information systems, it's about a 1 to 10 return on investment that we're getting for these for types of looking at early warning systems. So how we've set up Prepare is we have 3 pillars, and the first one is lovely, called Knowledge is Power, because we know that if communities, people, governments have information and knowledge, they're able to respond to and be prepared for climate and weather impacts. We've worked collectively with our interagency partners to do a lot in this space because the needs are unfortunately extremely great just in this one sort of area of climate information. If you think about just in Africa, only 1/8 the minimum density of weather stations recommended by the World Meteorological Organization, or WMO. You'll hear WMO a lot today. So what does that mean when you don't have that many weather stations? That means in Africa, where about 90% of your ag is rain-fed, and we don't actually know when that rain is coming, it's really hard to plant crops. And today is also the food day at COP, and it's really hard to sustain your family if you don't know when is the right time to plant your crops. So what are we doing about it? I'd say a lot. We're excited about a variety of different things we're doing. Just with USAID and NOAA, we're working on, and we've talked a lot about innovation this week, 3D printing automated weather stations called 3D Pause, which, how cool does that sound? That a single station can be produced by local authorities and takes about a week to produce, costs $200 to $400, and there's currently about 215 of these 3D Pause that are collecting over 700 million observations, and we're plans to expand that. So we've got the technology side of it, but it doesn't matter if you're not working with people if you don't get that technology out to people. And we have a really good system that's been in place for years, but we've been ramping it up under Prepare, called FuseNet, which stands for the Famine Early Warning Systems Network. Work closely with NOAA, with WMO, with universities and national organizations in countries around the world, but in about 10 of them now, we're using these 3D PAWs, these new 3D printed weather stations, to help make sure we're getting information out to even more people, and helping train so people can develop them and maintain them, which is really important. And then I would just say one of the things that we have a really great partnership with NASA called Severe, where we're working in countries around the world, over 45 countries around the world, to translate space information to actually real tangible information for people. So what that looks like is, working in Nepal, we've been able to provide a 48-hour flash flood forecast for rivers in Nepal and Bangladesh, which is really prone to flash floods, and think that it's helping also get SMS text to folks to make sure they know when to move. 2 more points. One of the things that we know we need to do right is make sure that we build trust, and that the information that we're providing to communities, people actually trust it, or it doesn't work. So you need to build those partnerships and have long-standing partnerships with communities, and as the administrator already noted, that you co-develop and create so that there's a really good feedback loop. And last, we've also been talking a lot about adaptation here at this COP, and something that the U.S. government and we've been working in close partnership with Ireland, have been encouraging other countries to sign on to something called the locally led adaptation principles. There are 8 principles, and the 5th one is to build a robust understanding of climate risk and uncertainty in local communities. And I think we're really working on that to try. We've got a couple extra countries have just signed up 2 nights ago, and are encouraging more countries to sign, to think about how we can get information in the hands of people around the world so that they can act on it and be more safe and prepared. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. I think lots of amazing announceables, and I love the 3D pause. I want one. But also, I love this, kind of focus on people and place and products. But, as we think about climate services and early warning systems, it's not only the technical infrastructure and physical infrastructure, but also the human infrastructure, and that's been missing. So thank you. So USAID has partnered with Mozambique's National Institute of Health to catalyze investments in climate and health. We're going to listen to a pre-recorded video from Dr. Marufo, who will describe how Mozambique is using climate information to inform decision-making in the health sector.
Greetings from Mozambique. My name is Tatiana Marufo, and I am the coordinator of the National Climate and Health Observatory in Mozambique. It is my pleasure to share with you our observatory activities. We have been working since 2016 to provide the evidence on the understanding of the relations between climate and health that involves not only the risks and the impacts on climate-sensitive diseases. The information that we generate aims at influencing the decision-making process within the health sector. I would like to share an example of one of our activities that we have been involved since 2018 in collaboration with the National Institute of Meteorology, in which every year since then we are part of a national outlook cluster for the rainy season, in which, using the meteorological forecasts, we have been able to develop a model using time series of epidemiological data to actually predict the probability of an outbreak of malaria and diarrheal diseases. With this, we produce risk maps at national level for those diseases. In the past years, we have been evaluating our performance in our models and are happy to share that we came up with a prediction precision of 90% when compared to what we have observed during the rainy season. Our mission has been accomplished since our risk maps have been incorporated in the national contingency plans, guiding the country preparedness and response to a potential emergency during the rainy and cyclonic season. For your attention, many thanks from Mozambique.
Thanks, Dr. Marufo, for those virtual remarks, and also thanks to USAID who made that happen at the very last minute when the video was due to the center. So thank you again. So in that same line of discussion of climate and health, let's move on to Dr. Benjamin Zaitchik. It's been well established that climate extremes have significant impacts on human health, and that the process of tailoring locally based approaches, as we've been discussing, can advance the science and implementation of early warning systems, improve public health response, and save lives. Can you describe the importance of collaboration between the U.S. government and intergovernmental organizations in building locally based approaches to improve public health and build climate resilience?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Julian. Thanks for the opportunity to be here on behalf of the American Geophysical Union. I'd like to answer just from the perspective of being a little outside of government, seeing these powerful partnerships between the USG agencies and the intergovernmental sphere. So as has already been said several times, this is all about co-generation, co-design of these systems. If you're not co-designing, it's not a system, it's a party trick. You need this to make impact. And in my experience, working with the AGU and in my own research, I really would like to emphasize three elements of this, that these partnerships between the U.S. government and intergovernmental organizations help us with convening, they help us with leveraging, and they help us with impact. And so on the convening front, the American Geophysical Union was able to work very much in partnership with NOAA, with leadership from Wasilla Chow from the international desk at NOAA, to put together a conference this past summer. And what was wonderful about the conference was all about early warning systems for health in Africa. And it was the AGU convened, NOAA helped lead, and then the WMO, WHO, other international partners were able to convene and co-fund in a way that really brought the right people to the table. So we had the end users, we had the ministries, we had the agencies, in addition to the researchers. That's really launching a dialogue that I think is going to go a long way in coming years, and was only possible through partnership. When it comes to leveraging, Dr. Spinrad already mentioned the National Heat Health Information System, and it's linked to the Global Heat Health Information Network. So this is work that's being done under the Group for Earth Observations, again, a global intergovernmental organization, with leadership from NOAA and NASA in this case and others, trying to put together these systems. And what we found is that I co-chair a working group on the heat system for GEO under, again, the leadership of NOAA, and we've really found that this ability to link back to GIN, to the global network, with the national system is both leveraging, making great impact of all the investments and strengths that NOAA and our other agency partners, as well as enhancing the reach of the system. And there's a great exchange of knowledge going on that allows us to customize the systems appropriately. And the final point I'll just make is on impact. And again, I'll refer to something that was just raised, which is the NASA USAID Severe partnership. And so it was great. Thank you for mentioning the Nepal work. I was part of those workshops where we were implementing these early warning systems in Nepal. We were in Nepal to do it, but we were at ICIMOD. And so we should remember that intergovernmental organizations aren't just the global intergovernmental organizations. These regional intergovernmental orgs are critical. They kind of bridge the gap in that they bring regional knowledge. The staff, the scientists, the researchers at a place like ICIMOD are from the region. They have the cultural knowledge. They have the contacts back into countries. And it allows, through this severe model to work through what they call the hub, right, in Kathmandu, and then you are working with partners from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from all other countries in the region, and they're convened by ICIMOD. And what that allows us then to do is take a U.S. government investment to partner efficiently and effectively through this regional intergovernmental organization, reaching the right end users, and using the kinds of communication tools and two-way information exchange that those intergovernmental partners at that regional hub are able to provide. So again, I think that the ability to convene, to leverage, and to achieve greater impact through these partnerships really speaks to the value of intergovernmental organizations working with the U.S. agencies to achieve local impact.
And appreciate that point on, these boundary organizations or international organizations, helping to cross the multiple spatial scales and work across that, also important. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Stephanie Morris from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Today is the first ever day at a COP dedicated to food and agriculture. USDA is already leading the way by investing in innovative climate solutions and sharing resources and solutions with the world. Can you tell us how our U.S. investments in climate services and early warning systems empowering and helping farmers, foresters, and landowners?
Thank you, Julian. So I want to start by saying thank you to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy for having me here today to talk about the role of climate services in agriculture and forestry, and also to the U.S. Pavilion for hosting us. So because of their inherent connection to ecosystems, natural resources, and climatic conditions, farmers and forest landowners are uniquely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And one of the ways that USDA is working to address this vulnerability is to build the adaptive capacity of farmers and foresters, improving their ability to make decisions about their operations and land in a changing climate. Their data and information needs are not uniform and vary based on regional climate impacts, ecosystem and operation type, and the timescales of their decision making. USDA's climate hubs are just one example of how USDA is working to address these needs and helping farmers and foresters adapt and build resilience to climate change. So the climate hubs consist of 10 regional climate hubs and 1 international climate hub that work to develop and deliver regionally appropriate information, technology, and technical assistance to enable climate-informed decision-making. A few examples of Climate Hub's tools that are empowering on-the-ground decision-making include the freeze date tool developed by the Midwest Climate Hub in partnership with the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. This tool helps farmers visualize changes in frost freeze dates at the county level from year to year and helps them answer questions about changes to the length of the growing season. The seed lot selection tool developed by the Northwest Climate Hub is designed to support reforestation efforts by matching seed or seedlings sources to planting sites based on future climate scenarios. That's helping meet survival and forest management goals. And a personal favorite of mine, because I applied in my own work, is the adaptation workbook. And this is a tool developed in part by the Northern Forests Climate Hub. This is a framework to support adaptation planning in a non-prescriptive way through menus of strategies and approaches. And a wide variety of menus have been developed to date, including for agriculture, watersheds, and urban forests, just to name a few. In addition to the wealth of climate information that USDA provides, USDA is also a consumer of climate information, relying on the capabilities of other federal agencies like NASA and NOAA to make data available and accessible. Ways in which USDA is working to integrate climate change data and information into its own decision-making and program delivery include, for example, USDA's Animal Plant Health Inspection Service is using climate projections to produce climate suitability maps, which will be used to prioritize surveys for early pest detection. The Natural Resources Conservation Service within USDA is working to better integrate climate information and resources into its conservation planning and assessments. And NRCS has also established co-leads to each regional climate hub to increase collaboration, represent NRCS priorities and needs, and draw on the expertise of the hubs across the country. And then finally, earlier this year, USDA's Forest Service released a beta version of its Climate Risk Viewer for the National Forest System. This tool is a combination of 28 data sets that overlays natural resources with indicators of climate change and climate risk. And they've since established an agreement with the American Forests to build on this work and expand it beyond just the National Forest System that the Forest Service manages, but to forests across the United States. One point I'd like to make as I wrap up is that many of these activities around climate services depend on the ability of USDA staff to use and communicate climate change information. So strengthening climate literacy within USDA will be a key element to our success. The approach to climate services I've described here, delivering tools and resources to farmers and forest landowners, while also bolstering USDA's own use of climate information, will help position USDA to better serve farmers, ranchers, forest landowners, and rural communities in a changing climate.
Thanks, Stephanie. And the USDA Climate Hubs program is very near and dear to my heart. But I do want to just focus on that a little bit. You know, these regional science and service organizations within the United States really serve as a domestic example for what can be done abroad. They work in partnership with NOAA's Climate Adaptation Partnership Program, or CAP-RISA, formerly the RISA program, the USGS Climate Adaptation Science Centers, and so they really help work with the folks on the ground, and they are really force multipliers for much of our federal climate services, especially in areas where we may not be there or we don't have enough resources. So thanks for bringing that up to the top. So our panel has shared some very powerful examples of local and regional examples of early warning systems and climate services across diverse sectors, and also important considerations for success. But I want to dive a little deeper, starting with Dr. Spinrad. What are some challenges in designing, implementing, and sustaining effective climate information and early warning systems?
Well, interestingly, you answered that question to some extent. Each of us did, I think, to a certain extent, in the co-development piece. And that is an extraordinary challenge because it sounds relatively straightforward. Yeah, just know what the problem is, know who's going to work there, who are the key players there. This is where I think the USDA hubs, the USGS centers, our CAPRISAs, the regional climate construct, folks who have the boots on the ground are extraordinarily helpful because they are the ones who are going to basically say that's the touchstone you need to focus on. There is where the concern lies. There is where the issues are well defined. There's where the expertise lies. So it's not just about co-development. It's about co-development with the right team, and that's an extraordinarily big challenge. But we have that special weapon of having the on-site location. I would say that the other is, once you've identified that and can co-develop, how do you build that capacity? What are the tools in order to make sure that folks understand where is the information? It's one thing for us in the U.S. government to say, look at the camera product or the climate resilience toolkit or the NCA 5 Atlas, but if you don't know how to use that information, and this is where I would say the private sector has been enormously helpful. All of us have worked with Esri, for example, to make sure that there's the storytelling element, and that's part of the capacity building. The other thing that I'd say is a challenge is maintaining the relationship. So there's a lot of fanfare oftentimes. We're seeing right now at NOAA rolling out a number of the Inflation Reduction Act projects and the bipartisan infrastructure law investments, and that's kind of a big one-time upfront groundbreaking effort, but how do you sustain the capacity? How do you sustain the understanding to use that information? And then I'd also say another challenge, quite honestly, even though we've all learned how to sing Kumbaya among the federal agencies here, there are some real challenges with respect to understanding roles, responsibilities, not just between the federal agencies, and my hat's off to the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Council on Environmental Quality, the White House, who has worked very hard to make sure that through GCRP, for example, we have that close coordination. But what's the role of philanthropy? What's the role of the private sector? What's the role of academia in making sure that we're all pulling on our oars in synchrony in the most effective manner? So I would say those are some of the big challenges we have to deal with.
We got a lot of work ahead of us. But no, thanks, Rick. I think it's part of that no wrong door approach to technical assistance, which is part of climate services, just ensuring when we have a stakeholder, a community, a user come to our door, they can easily find their way through the federal family, and if not within the federal family, with the right partner that we work with. And that's really hard for us. We have a lot of big silos, but we're working through it, as you mentioned. Yeah. Thanks, Rick. So, Anne, you had described in-depth prepare and relevant U.S. investments in climate services and early warning systems. Same question for you, and from your perspective, what are some challenges in designing, implementing, and sustaining effective climate information services and early warning systems?
I might want to riff a little bit off Dr. Spinner's comments, because it's a coordination. We're working on it really well in the USG. But there's also international partners working in this space. We don't have as much money as the world needs for adaptation, so to be smart about how we're using that and being coordinated. There's some good civil society networks that do this, that are trying to help us, help people in advances to make sure we're actually getting the right information to communities and countries. And also, we need to support sustainability in our partner countries where we work. It's only effective if we've got the infrastructure. You need to make, so that's the hard stuff, the infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, the physical infrastructure that you need to pay for and maintain. And then you have the people infrastructure. And this is a technical, we are not talking, this is not algebra. Sometimes this can be calculus and how we translate, climate information services so it's usable. So really making sure, we have the right people and have long-term partnerships with those. We have good examples. We mentioned Nepal earlier, but also with FuseNet, we've been working in Bangladesh for years. That helps building up the technical capacity of some of our partners to be able to take this information, take the learning and implement it. Within FuseNet, we have some brilliant scientists who also have their own networks and community of practices, who share amongst themselves. So these are sort of solutions to challenges on sustainability that, making sure we have the right staff and the right technical know-how. We've already talked about the need for co-creation. I think that's one of the things that we walk away with is continued co-creation. We still need to do it. We could still have some more work on that. And I would just say also the long-term funding to support some of these more complex partnerships and challenges is also really important. So these are all things that we're looking at. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. And just to tie together what Rick and you had mentioned, I think with this, huge investment through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, it's really important that we really maintain and strengthen these relationships with our communities. And that trust is really important, especially not only in climate services, technical assistance, early warning systems, but in all the work we do. So thanks. So Ben, what are some challenges for climate services in the health and early warning systems, specifically around community-driven partnerships and global networks?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one thing we're finding is that early warning is difficult, right? It's a technical challenge, and it's something that is not mature in all cases. We still have a lot of uncertainties that we're dealing with. But as these systems mature and as we get better at it, we need to match that with decision frameworks. And the decision frameworks for most end users are really poorly defined or non-existent. And so when we think about what are our successful early warning systems, and some of them mentioned already, so things like the famine early warning system, I think that that's very effective, the family early warning system, when it comes to its key end users, because its key end users are large international efforts that know what their decision point is, and so they can put that into their framework relatively in a straightforward manner. And there are other examples like that, large reservoir system, early warning, things like this. The financial sector, as someone who develops seasonal forecasts, one thing that's frustrating to me sometimes is that a speculator will take a 51-49 chance every day, and then the people you're trying to reach can't take a 90-10 chance because they don't know how that works within the frameworks of all the things they're trying to manage. And as you drill down, from the large capacity, low discount rate, simple decision framework folks down to reaching the community, you're at a certain point where it's not like, we need to work together to show you so we understand how you can use this. It's like sometimes it's just that, you're just looking at each other, right? Quite frankly, and saying, okay, well, what kind of information do you need? And then sometimes it comes down to the fact that they don't need an early warning system because that's just not going to work in their decision framework. The penalty paid for false action, right, which is a classic psychological problem, is too high. The other competing demands are too urgent. And so then what you find is that maybe we need to think about climate services more broadly and how that works into your decision framework and meet it there rather than say, okay, here's a system that even though we might say, we want to co-design an early warning system for X. Maybe actually, no, we don't want to co-design an early warning system for X. We want to take advantage of information systems to create something that makes sense within your decision framework.
Thanks, Ben. And that follows along with, tailoring things to what the community actually needs and listening to them and what they value. And so appreciate those. So Stephanie, from a domestic angle, how is USDA reaching historically underserved communities and who are disproportionately vulnerable to the effects of climate change and examples like the climate hubs?
Thanks, Julian. So, consideration of equity and environmental justice cuts through all of our climate work at USDA. And one of the things we're trying to do is ensure that the programs we support and the investments we make are accessible to everyone and equitably benefit communities that are disproportionately affected and historically underserved. So one of the ways that we're doing this is through the Biden-Harris administration's Justice 40 initiative, and that aims to deliver at least 40% of the benefits of our climate investments to exactly those communities. And USDA's Climate Hubs are one of those Justice 40 covered programs at USDA. And so the climate hubs have been strengthening their work on environmental justice by targeting, climate hazards that do disproportionately impact these communities, like urban heat stress, for example. The climate hubs are also using lessons learned from extreme weather events to help communities better prepare and be more resilient to future extreme weather. The Caribbean Climate Hub has done some really great work in Puerto Rico in the wake of recent hurricanes to synthesize those lessons learned. And then the Southeast Climate Hub has some great hurricane commodity guides that are state-based and commodity-based, and they serve as a kind of a tailored resource to all types of different farming operations. And then the hubs are also strengthening their collaboration with the Cooperative Extension Service with funding from USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture to expand their reach and impact in rural communities. Because the climate hubs are a few staff at these 10 locations across the country. And so they really need to partner with these organizations that have even greater reach to amplify their message. And then just the last note is that the climate hubs are also working hand in hand with tribal communities across the United States to support them in addressing the unique challenges that climate change poses to them. And so just to kind of circle back to that climate adaptation workbook that I mentioned, the Northern Forest Climate Hub developed a tribal climate adaptation menu, and they did that in partnership with a diverse group of collaborators representing tribal, academic, intertribal, and governmental entities in the Great Lakes region. And so this tribal adaptation menu provides a framework to integrate indigenous and traditional knowledge, cultural language, and history into the climate adaptation planning process. And though this menu was developed with specific tribes in the Great Lakes region, it in itself was made to be adaptable to other indigenous communities, and it's already being taken up by other climate hub regions to serve the tribal communities in their specific locations. So.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I'm going to go a bit off script because you mentioned something really important. We are trying to build more equitable and effective climate services and early warning systems for all. And for all is in our title of this session. And so I open it up to the panel if any of you have additional comments based off of Stephanie's remarks, or kind of how do we build equitable climate services and early warning systems for all?
I've got one thought I'd like to add, and it's based on the personal experience I've had at NOAA, where I've said let's start reaching out to communities, or sectors I should say, that are a bit non-traditional. And so I think part of the early warnings for all is looking to the capacities that might be out there that can be, if you will, exploited in ways that we might not have thought of before. So we at NOAA have had more interaction with the faith-based community over the last couple of years than I ever would have imagined. And if you think about it, crassly stated, houses of prayer offer great opportunity as cooling centers most of the time. The duty cycle on a house of prayer is rather low when you get right down to it. The point of fact is here, the religious communities have said, we would like to offer this service, but only if we have a capability for knowing beforehand when we're going to see an extreme heat event. So I think part of the early warning for all agenda has got to include getting out of our comfort zone in terms of where there are partnerships with seemingly unrelated communities that might actually have some equities to bring to bear.
I'm just going to add, and you also have that new partnership with the American Society of Civil Engineers and really getting climate information into building codes.
I love that. That's an exciting example. It talks about how we need partnerships and taking it on the international side. We really need partnerships to advance and close the gap in early warning. Across the continent of Africa, we only have only 40% of people are covered by early warning systems. So when we talk inclusion, I mean, this is a major problem and issue. What does that look like when we talk about costs globally? Over the last 2 decades, we've had climate-related disasters. It's affected 4 billion people, cost more than $2 trillion, and obviously there's a huge human impact on that, and we know it's going to get worse. So we have to get serious about inclusion and getting this right. USAID, we're the largest humanitarian donor, and we've had to pay for some of these like what happened. The cost of inaction is our humanitarian budgets. We've spent in 2022, $11.9 billion, 2023, what are we at? We're at $9.8 billion to address the life-saving needs of climate, conflict, and other things. So it's not just climate, but also conflict disasters. But we know that the need is growing. So some of the things that we've been trying to do to respond and reach and address early warning for all, partnering again with our friends at NOAA and WMO and UNDRR, are trying to implement the early warning for all call that the UN Secretary General put out 2 years ago now. We just made an initial investment of $67 million to support early warning systems since last year, so to really help communities at risk be able to have effective warning systems by 2027. And right now that'll help. We're working in 20 African nations, the SIDS, the Small Island Developing States, and least developed countries. And this is helping us expand flood guidance systems to help with flash flood guidance systems, so people know if it's safe to send your kid to school and that the road is not going to be washed out, because you actually have that information as an SMS or even a more traditional knowledge way of letting communities know that it's not safe to travel or go to work, et cetera. Thanks.
Thanks. In the spirit of going off script, I just want to build on something that Dr. Spinrad said. So at AGU, we've been working a lot on open science frameworks, right? I think we all appreciate the importance of that across multiple fields. And you mentioned the work with the faith-based communities. And so bring this back closer to home. So in Baltimore, I'm involved in a lot of work with the Black Church Network, and doing work both on providing cooling centers and such like this, but also being centers of information for the communities. And it's something that they educate me on frequently, right? Which is, it's yes, it's a wonderful partnership, and they enjoy being, the citizen science role of going and taking the measurements and learning a little bit in the process. But they want to own those data, not to own them to close them. Everyone's on board with the open science, right? We need that. But to become the authority, to be so that when people, for example, if people are going to be going to that house of prayer for cooling, who's issuing that information? To whom do they turn for that knowledge, right? And so it's possible that it just comes out from the city or from somewhere, and then they go there. But that's not what we're looking for sustainability. What we're looking for is that data sovereignty, in which that information is owned. The authority of knowledge and understanding of that system resides with the community. And I think that working through open science frameworks and also really working from a place of a sense of the ownership of the process is really going to be important if we're going to get these systems to last long term.
Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate that. So to bring us to a close, I would like to hear final thoughts from each of our speakers. Invite you to take 1 minute, which means 2 minutes mostly, to share your perspective on what you see as major opportunities in advancing early warning systems and climate services for all, which we've talked about. But closing remarks, Rick.
I will be very brief because I've got to run off to another talk real quick. But I think it's diversified in the sense of we've heard so much about how different groups are bringing different capabilities and perspectives to this. We're really good at doing this kind of thing, preaching to the choir, if you will, talking among ourselves. But I would encourage everybody in this audience who presumably cares about early warnings for all to think about what group you might want to talk with that might be able to bring something to the table. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
That's great. That tees up PREPARE, President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. This is the work that we're doing. We have great collaboration across the interagency. We also have a huge last mile. It's development speak for the actual users, on the people, communities that need the information. So I think the challenge to us all is translating this energy to making sure that we have the real impact on the ground and work, again, co-creation. We keep bringing up co-creation in partnership with them so we can have the impact that we know we want and these communities are searching for and are able to also be empowered to use. Thanks.
Thanks, Ann. Bye, Rick. Thanks.
I'll go with keyword integration. So, I think that making sure that early warning systems don't stand on their own, because none of us only thinks about one thing when we're making our decisions. And so if we can think about the relative merits and advantages of acting on an early warning system for something, be it heat or food or whatever it is, how does that fit into the broader well-being calculation that we're all doing implicitly all the time?
So you're clearly doing something right, Julian, because I'm going to echo what Dr. Spinrad and Ann said as well. And so I was going to say, with all this attention and energy on climate services across the U.S. government, I'm looking forward to even more opportunities to strengthen our interagency relationships, to increase the use of climate data within USDA. I'm excited about enhancing the technical assistance side of the climate services spectrum, and then also providing feedback from within the agriculture and forestry communities to improve the development and delivery of climate services. So I think it, more than the data and the tools, working on that other end of the spectrum too, and really making that stronger is what I'm really excited about in the coming months and years. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for spending time out of your busy schedules with us, and thank you to the panelists, thank you to the audience for sharing their unique perspectives with us all. Our panelists have highlighted really important considerations for climate services and early warning systems for all. Some things I jotted down: partnerships, co-creation, co-production, the people and the human infrastructure side, that technical assistance. You can't just put out a tool. You need to have some guidance. You have to work with communities. And of course, part of that is also building trust and long-term relationships, and that can be difficult with one-time funding, but funding that is truly transformative. And so all of these things, we have a lot of work ahead of us, not only within the federal family, but with you all in the audience. Addressing the climate crisis will require information and action across all scales, and we know that by working together, we can help to meet this challenge by increasing our collective capacity to understand and apply climate information through engagement at all levels, as we discussed. It will enable the design of solutions that meet communities' needs. And so with that, I'd like to thank you all.